All over the United States and all over the world, relationships are going through their ups and downs right now. The Oxygen 365 podcast brings you some of the best relationship advice, thinking, and practical ideas available. Advice you can act on this moment, or tonight, tomorrow, or when you need it the most. Our collection of interviews with some of the top authors, speakers, and leaders in all aspects of relationships can help you grow, get through a trouble spot, or make an already good day great. Get ready to join our host, Noel Metter, as he interviews our guests each week, bringing you the best and most current information on improving your relationships. Whether you're dating, engaged, newly married, empty nesters, or in the thick of a problem, you're sure to gain something from our interview today. So without further delay, here's Noel with today's guest and a ton of solid, practical relationship advice.
Welcome to Oxygen 365. I'm your host, Noel Metter, and this is episode number 15. Today's guest is Michael Dye. Michael has worked with hurting and addicted people for over 20 years. He's a California National Level 2 and International Certified Addiction Counselor. He developed the Genesis Process, which is a hugely successful relapse prevention program, while he and his wife, Kathy, were the program directors for the Santa Barbara Rescue Mission. And in addition to his private counseling practice, Michael works full-time training counselors and churches in the Genesis counseling skills. Michael, welcome to the show.
Right. Actually, it's been 35 years. I'm getting a little longer in the tooth now. So
35. Wow. Well, I'll tell you, you've been one of those guests that I've been really looking forward to having on the show, because I think the topic that we're going to discuss today is very relevant. Unfortunately, it's become way more relevant than I think many of us would like to. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about addiction and how to get help. Is there hope? All those kind of things. So I'm going to jump right in there.
Okay.
But excited to have you. I know that, as someone who has done a lot of counseling and working with couples, this is a topic that comes up a lot. So, let's just start with maybe defining addiction. And, for someone who is addicted, whether it's behavior or a substance, how do you define that? How do you define if someone's addicted?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. And I like the simpler something is, the more effective it is. And I define an addiction is when we continue to do something that we know is not good for us, something that's self-destructive, and we continue to do it anyway in spite of the consequences. So the logical thing, if I'm doing something that I know is really not good for me, then why don't I stop it? Okay? Then there's something else in play there. But I think it also is really important to define the word recovery. And this is foundational to Genesis and what we're seeing, difference between sobriety and recovery. Of course, sobriety just means to abstain. You're not doing it anymore. But the word recovery, which is misused so much, actually means to return to a former healthy state. In other words, become the person you were before you were abused or traumatized, and then start a coping behavior in order to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So that's what real recovery is to become the person you were before, the trauma caused you to become addicted to coping behaviors. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that's different than what most people see.
Yeah, that is. Absolutely. Because I think a lot of people look at addiction as sobriety, right? I haven't had an ounce of alcohol for 25 years.
Right. Thus,
I don't have an addiction. But I think we, a lot of times, step over and quickly move to, sobriety versus recovery, which you put a lot of emphasis on. And maybe tell us a little bit of how does someone, let me start by asking what contributes to the development of an addiction?
Well, let me say that if you give up a coping behavior without dealing with what it's there for, what it's there to cope with, you end up having to trade one addiction for another. And we call it trading seats on the Titanic. Yeah? Is that, what it was coping with is still in play, and it's still the pain or whatever it is. And so you have to end up finding, another way to cope with. So there's not real freedom in that. And of course, sometimes the new coping behavior might be better than the old coping behavior. But it's still, if the issues that are driving the addiction aren't dealt with, then you just have to find a new way to cope.
Take us into the mind of an addict. I think that's where this starts, right? A lot of the stuff that we're talking about today is essential to what's going on, the chemicals, and even the way that we're processing the pain, the trauma that you reference. Can you walk us through that? What's going on in the mind of an addict?
Well, it's, look at the definition we have of addiction, which is doing something self-destructive in spite of the consequences. I haven't met anybody who, and that term isn't an addict, which means everybody does something. It just, some of them are more destructive than others. Mm-hmm. But actually, most of the roots of addiction we know now happen in the first 2 years of life, unfortunately.
What?
A little baby.
In the first 2 years?
Actually, the first 9 months of life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And this is how it works, is that in the first 9 months, a year, 2 years at the most of life, that a little baby's brain makes a simple decision, whether the world is safe or dangerous. If the world is safe, the brain wires itself into a exploratory and creative brain. See? But if you grow up in what we call chronic inescapable stress, then the brain wires itself into a hypervigilant brain. So I'm going to oversimplify things. But what happens is there's this part of our brain called the limbic system, which interestingly enough is what the very heart of the brain. It's the very center of the brain. It controls everything that you don't control.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. And so when the brain becomes hypervigilant, which means, the world is dangerous, the neurochemistry of the brain changes a lot. And usually that comes from, like we said, chronic inescapable stress. So the bottom line of it in these first couple of years is that when our ability to bond, trust, and attach to other people, gets damaged, then we have to learn to meet our own needs, which is called self-gratification. Okay? And that's not the way we're designed. We're designed to get our needs met through relationships, both relationships with God and with people. Okay? And of course, what we call a double bind is that we are social bonding human beings, who wound each other. So the thing I need the most is also the thing that's wounded me the most.
Oh, wow.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's relationships that mess this up. Mm-hmm. And it's relationships that'll heal us. But if we get into this place where we can't bond, trust, and attach to other people or God, then we have to learn to self-gratify. And this is a key, not only to addiction, but also to recovery. Because all addiction is self-gratification. I mean, not anybody find a flaw in that.
Now, that's an interesting definition. Wow.
Okay. So, I say it's so simple. Once the simpler you make something, the more powerful it is.
Right.
So if all addiction is self-gratification, then all recovery is going to be what? Learning to get those needs met as we were designed from and gratification from other people. So when I'm down, depressed, angry, lonely, I'm designed to get that part of me filled, which is my heart or this limbic system, filled with relationships from other people. And that makes me a healthy human being. But if I can't trust other people because I've been so wounded by them, then I have to learn to self-gratify. And that's what all addictions do. And especially when we're talking about, I know you have a lot of military personnel, but all addictions do the same thing. They temporarily push unwanted thoughts, feelings, and memories out of your awareness. And it takes energy to do that. Okay? So when you begin to get into recovery, all those thoughts, feelings, and memories begin to come forward. And that's why you can't do recovery alone. Because this part of the brain, this limbic system, has a very simple memory system. Okay? It remembers things that have to do with fear and pain. It says avoid it. And then it has a memory system that says anything that has to do with pleasure and reward, do it again. So there you have the addictive brain. Fear and pain, avoid it. Okay? Pleasure and reward, do it again. So anything that takes away fear and pain, we become almost instantly addicted to. And what the brain does is any behavior or emotion or substance that it associates with survival. I need this to survive.
Yeah. Then
it puts out a unique emotion called a craving. And And a craving is a unique emotion where only real or imagined survival is at stake. So that's where Genesis has, pioneered part of this field, is if we can find out why the brain is actually putting forth a craving for something that's bad for me, and we can change that part of the brain. If you can eliminate craving, you can eliminate relapse. And all this is unconscious.
Yeah.
See, it's all subconscious. No one can tell me, why are you such an angry person? Why are you anxious? Why do you shoot heroin? See?
Right.
That's unconscious.
Right.
But the answers are in the person, and a good counselor is what we train Genesis people to do, is to ask right questions, and we call it name the sucker. Okay? So I think the interesting part of this is what we're discovering now is for 2,000 years or more than that, people have known there's this part of us which is called our heart. It's this mysterious part. We're not talking about the thing that beats in my chest.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
talking
need
about the thing that gets
clarification.
broken, or the thoughts and intentions of our heart. And even Paul in the Bible says, it's with our heart that we believe that results in righteousness. And I really got on that when I heard that. So our heart is where our belief systems are, and it results in what? Righteousness, which is how we behave. So the simplicity of it, if you want to change how you behave, you have to change your heart. And that's been the challenge.
Wow.
How do we change the heart?
Yeah. So to just clarify with the listeners, when you talk about heart, what are you actually talking about? If it's not the physical beating heart,
Right.
is that the will, the emotions, my mind?
Well, the dictionary and all calls our heart is the center of ourselves. It's the center of our beliefs and emotions.
Okay.
But actually, this is where, understanding this and then understanding all the new brain scan technology that we have, it's actually what we call the limbic system.
Okay. So it's actually the limbic system.
Right. Is what we've called the heart all these
Wow.
years. It's going to ruin all the country western songs. For sure. I mean, you broke my limbic system.
You broke. I like it. I think that might be a next bestseller. So
Yeah. Well, let me explain, why this is so fascinating, because it's exciting because it's the first time in history we actually know what's broken with self-destructive behavior. And now that we begin to know what's broken, we're being able to come up with ways to treat it. So the limbic system, I'll just read this, controls our experiential memory. And that's really important.
Yeah,
It's called our primal brain or the reptilian brain. It only records these experiences, and experiences have to do with fear and pain, avoid it, pleasure and reward, do it again.
Right.
Very simple.
Yeah.
It controls our emotions, and especially how we react to new experiences. So when I had old experiences that, something has hurt me, okay, for example, say I get bitten by a dog, okay? So for a while, my limbic system, every time I see a dog, is going to create an emotion called anxiety, which says, be careful, these are dogs.
Right.
They're going to bite you.
Right.
Okay? And so what heals it is when you start having new and good experiences with dogs. See? So it's experiences that mess us up, and it's experiences with what? Relationships that are going to heal us. It also controls unconscious learning, dreaming, attention, pleasure and reward, arousal. I mean, all our pleasure reward chemicals, that for doing good things or chemicals or all these things, it's all that reward system is in the limbic system. It also, in arousal, okay, all the sexual arousal, that's all in the limbic system.
Right.
Sex is not in the genitals, it's in your brain.
Right.
Okay. And the expression of emotional, motivational, sexual, and social behavior, including the formation of loving attachments, which is why we've always, had songs and poetry and all these things about the heart. But it also controls the cravings for pleasure-inducing drugs, food, sex, gambling, or other real or imagined survival needs. Okay? So this is where, also a thing the Apostle Paul said. Apostle Paul was a strong guy. He was strong-willed. He went through a lot of stuff, and he's a tough guy, right?
Yeah.
But he said, in my mind, I want to serve the law of God. But in my behavior, I do the very thing I don't want to do. So he makes an interesting statement. He says, if I'm doing the very thing I don't want to do, it's not me doing it. So what he's saying is, in spite of my conscious mind and my good intentions, there's something in me that's stronger than me that causes me to do the very thing I don't want to do. And then for 150 years, psychology has recognized this, and they call it the unconscious. So we blame the unconscious for everything. But the trouble is, how do we change it?
Right.
Right. How do we heal this?
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's
Let me ask you this question. Let me ask you this question. Is it possible to recover in isolation? Have you ever seen anyone actually be able to overcome an addiction by themselves without community?
Well, I've seen them go in sobriety.
Okay, so that's the differentiation.
Sobriety, but not recovery.
Okay.
And most of the people who just quit on themselves, about 10% of people actually just quit an addiction on their own.
Okay.
Well, we call them dry drunks. See? Because their personality and the issues that they were having that caused them to drink didn't get resolved.
Okay.
So a lot of times they become, very angry, isolated, defensive kinds of people, but not always.
Right.
Not always.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So here's another question. I mean, this is so fascinating to me when you start to actually peel back the layers of addiction and then talk about recovery. I'm sure you've heard of something called Schick Shadel. Have you ever heard of that therapy?
Schick Shadel?
Yeah, Schick Shadel. Okay, thank you for correcting me. I just know enough about it that I don't ever want to have to do it. But essentially, it's the, for someone who's an alcoholic, one of the ways they overcome that addiction is that they begin to, they serve you your favorite cocktail, let you drink that, and then they begin to put this substance
you throw up and all that.
Yeah, it makes you throw up repeatedly. And I've talked to several people who've gone through that, and it literally cured them. But I'm just wondering, are they missing part of the equation as you're talking about when it comes to recovery?
Well, it's reprogramming the brain in associating something that was pleasure with pain. So it's switching that.
Okay.
But also, what was there to cope with, hasn't changed. And with that kind of, of pain reprogramming, it can last up for up to 6 months. Well, if you don't deal with the core of it, you see,
right,
that it's relationships that messed us up, and it's relationships that are going to heal it.
Yeah.
So, like I say, that, the brain records pleasure and pain. Okay? Well, unfortunately, pretty much when it comes to addiction, 100% of the pleasure, of the pain and fear in our lives comes from relationships.
Right.
Yeah, it's not physical pain that causes us to become addicted. And actually, people who get addicted say morphine from physical pain. When the pain goes away, they get off of it. For example, 80% of the men who were addicted to heroin in the Vietnam War, just stopped when they came home.
Yeah. Wow.
So it wasn't. When they get into a different environment, it'll change everything.
Right. So we've been focusing on the one who is addicted. I want to switch and kind of put a focus on the family member, the spouse, the partner who actually is in the relationship with someone who's addicted. What do you say to them? I mean, they're living this reality, right? They're living whether it's the craziness of it, or just the pain of it. What would you suggest that they do? I mean, I think part of it, one is, do they even know it's happening? So has this thing gone underground? And this could be more and more the sexual addiction arena.
Yeah.
Or just purely, the addiction of an alcoholic and having to live in that kind of situation. What would you say to them?
Well, as human beings, it's pain that motivates us to change. So anything that minimizes the pain of the consequences of their behavior and choices, actually adds to the addiction. There's an old saying that say, enablers kill more addicts than drugs do. So what we do with someone who is active in their addiction is we take away all their enablers. For example, someone who's a rageaholic, someone is an enabler, allowing them to get away with that kind of hurtful, angry, fearful, abusive behavior without any consequences. So that's the first thing we do is take away all their enablers so that their pain will come up, which will motivate them to change.
So what does that look like? I just got to drill down because it's really fascinating. You remove the enablers, but what if the spouse is the enabler? How do you remove them?
Of course she is.
Yeah. So how do you remove her or him?
Well, it's not removing her; it's getting her some support.
Okay.
And one of the programs out there that's most successful with that is Al-Anon. Al-Anon is a program that I've seen so many lives helped and changed through that program because there's a lot of wisdom there, especially with women who have been living with a destructive person for some time, and they've learned how to either detach from that person or to live with the behavior and not become sick themselves, which is what we call codependency.
Right.
Or relationship addiction.
Would you say that codependency is one of the primary mechanisms that keeps people in addiction? As long as that's there?
Codependency looks very altruistic.
Yeah, right?
But it's actually just as selfish as any other addiction.
Wow.
And so when you change the name of something, it really becomes more powerful. Codependency doesn't really mean much. It's kind of a vague name.
Yeah.
When you say a relationship addiction. In other words, a relationship addict feels responsible for other people's problems, feelings, and behaviors. And so in Genesis we would say, so why do you feel responsible for my behaviors? Okay?
Yeah.
So this is the way it works. So a codependent says, I'm okay when you're okay. But when you're not okay, then I can't be okay.
Wow.
I'm guilty or I'm fearful or anxious, you see. So the only way for me to be okay is to make you okay. Okay? See, so I'm addicted to you. So it looks like it's very altruistic, but it's actually, I need you to make my bad feelings go away, just like a heroin addict or an alcoholic would feel anxious or depressed and take their drug.
Right.
So I'm addicted to you because I can't be okay unless I control you being okay.
Yeah. Wow.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
So that's the core of codependency. So in codependency, where it usually comes from, the origins of it, is where children become responsible for adult behaviors. So you have alcoholics, divorce, rageaholics in the home, and the children try to hold the home together because it's part of their limbic survival.
Right.
And they try to hold it together, and they lose themselves into other people's behaviors for their own survival. And in these things, one thing is a misnomer, is people say, now we know with the limbic system, is time heals all wounds. That's a lie. Okay? Nothing goes away until it's resolved.
Wow.
You see, because the limbic system doesn't have a sense of time. It doesn't know the difference between 40 years ago and yesterday. Okay? It only remembers things that hurt me or things that have, caused me fear and pain and anxiety, and then I react to them.
Right.
So what we call that is where somebody pushed your button.
Yeah.
It caused you to over or underreact to a situation. Where in Genesis, we pretty much ignore the behavior and we say, well, whose button is it? And what button were they able to push? What's the name of that button?
Yeah.
See what I mean?
Right.
And which is in the term of a belief system. Okay. And so you have a choice to push people away where they can't get close enough to push your button, which is what most people unconsciously do, or you can get the button removed, and then that's real freedom.
Yeah. So is that at the heart of this whole thing, is the belief system? I mean, for someone who's fully recovered, it's not just a behavior modification or change, it's a belief change. Is that correct?
Right. So, for example, we were talking about codependency.
Yeah.
In Genesis, we have about 30 or 40 of these belief systems that we have found that drive most self-destructive behavior. So we already said one for codependency, which is I'm responsible for other people's feelings, problems, and behaviors. But the other belief system that drives codependency is if I'm not in control, something bad will happen. So they feel responsible. But what happens is beliefs create emotions, and emotions drive behaviors. So, for example, one of the major addictions we have in this country that people don't even think is an addiction is stress. We're a stressed out society.
Yeah.
Well, when you change the name of something, see, so stress is anxiety, right? That's
Wow.
what stress is.
Yeah.
And what is anxiety? It's a nice name for fear. See? So instead of saying I'm stressed out today, say what am I afraid of? And that's where we have a thing in Genesis we call a double bind worksheet, which we call name the sucker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's saying, so if you're going to feel anxiety today, you have to believe something to create that emotion.
Wow.
So we pretty much ignore the anxiety
Wow.
because it's only a road to the belief system.
Right.
The emotion has the belief system in it, but the tricky part of it is you can't get to it yourself. See? And that's why Genesis, we train the counselors only ask questions because it's your life, it's your trauma, and how you coped and reacted to it is all in you, not in me.
Mm-hmm.
But I can ask the right questions, okay, in a safe atmosphere that the limbic system will begin to reveal its secrets. And that's why we have the change groups. And there's rules and structures with those change groups. And the main thing about it is when it gets safe, right? Then these unconscious, sabotaging, destructive belief systems will begin to reveal themselves.
Right. Right.
So when you have anxiety is one thing, right? What do you do about that? You have to take some drugs or do some yoga or something. But when you get to the belief system, now it's all sorts of things. So that's the key to real recovery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? Is you had a trauma and you create a belief system. I'll never trust anybody again. All men are, you know. And, a real common one under addiction, especially for men, is no matter how hard I try,
It'll
never be enough.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we would say, there's the belief system. So how does that make you feel? Angry, anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next question is, how does that affect you in your relationships?
Yeah.
So this is where it gets tricky, is how do you change the belief system?
Yeah.
Because it was established experientially.
Right.
So talk therapy doesn't work with
Right.
addictions. See?
This is so huge. This is so huge what you're talking about, because I think so many people, they don't realize the power of a trauma, and then ultimately that it was an experience that created it, and then they're thinking that if I do the talk part. So tell me, what is your prescription to help as it relates to that trauma and it being experiential?
Well, like I say, out of the trauma came a survival belief system. You know, I got wounded, rejected. You know, I will never trust anybody again, which is extremely the most common belief system for people who have been abused, or you know, people coming out of war, you know, and PTSD.
Yeah.
So let me put it this way: okay, is the mind will replay what the heart doesn't delete. See,
So
and that's where
let me just make sure I get that. So the mind will replay what the heart has not
deleted.
Deleted. Okay. So the limbic system has not deleted, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Okay.
So the mind is trying to replay it. So I think that's very common with PTSD.
Okay. Let's talk. Let's just stop there for a moment, because we have a lot of listeners that you know we've worked with on the side of, you know, wounded, ill, and injured, and most of them invisible wounds, PTSD. Right. So yeah, let's just camp out here for a second.
Wounds. They're limbic wounds. Yeah. So with PTSD, what's happened is they went through traumatic experiences where it doesn't make sense. And I think I talked to you before a little bit about this. Like World War II, there wasn't nearly as much of this, right, because it was real clear that we were the good guys, Hitler and Japan were the bad guys, and we saw a lot of bad things, saw our friends die, and did a lot of things, but it was worth it because we won. You see what I mean? So my brain is able to put it away and compartmentalize it and say, yeah, all that trauma was worth it because, you see, the outcome was good. But where you have Vietnam and Afghanistan, it's a war that we didn't win, we're not going to win. And so how do you justify and compartmentalize, you know, especially justify all the things that you saw and did and were traumatized? It doesn't make sense. See? So the heart hasn't been able to put it away and compartmentalize it, so the brain keeps playing it over and over again, trying to find a way to resolve it.
Yeah. So how do you delete? How do you hit the? I think a lot of people want to know, how do I delete that trauma? I mean, if we're talking about PTSD, these things have happened. I didn't necessarily sign up to see them happen, but they've happened nonetheless. And now my brain can't turn it off. So how do they delete it?
Well, it's the same with all addictions, and so, and especially even with sex addiction, which is, I'm sure your military families are dealing with it. Mm-hmm. It's pandemic. Mm-hmm. 60% of all divorces in the United States now have pornography as a major issue.
Wow.
The average age of first view of pornography is between 8 and 11 years old. It gets younger and younger all the time. Mm. So it's really screwing up people's ability to have relationships, which is in the limbic system, isn't it? And when you mess that up, then what's your whole life going to be like? You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. If we're not able to live in a way that we were designed, okay? So I think the key is the word designed. See? So there are therapies now that are trying to work with this. EMDR is one. They're using that with PTSD and somewhat successful. But
now, what is that? For our listeners, is that rapid eye movement?
Yeah, rapid eye desensitization.
Okay.
I can't say it.
Okay.
Desensitizing, the brain, the limbic system of trauma.
Right.
But yet, so what has to happen is the memory of the trauma has to be changed and, what's the word for it? It's, I can't remember. Anyway, it's, it has to have a new memory there. And of course, in Genesis, because it has to be experiential, that's where we do the counseling, and that's where God comes into it. And basically, with all addictions, the first place you go is with God. I mean, the 12-step programs everywhere, it's God. In other words, I can't control this thing, and there has to be a power or strength outside of me,
right?
Higher power of some sort that is going to give me a strength that I don't have myself to help me overcome this. And the thing is, he does that through people. So when we name the sucker and get the belief system, no matter how hard I try, it's never good enough because I grew up on a farm and whatever it was, no one ever worked hard enough. And I became a workaholic, rageaholic, sex addict, you know what I mean? Then to go back into the emotion, we call it a road to the wound. Okay? And there are several different processes. Theophostic is another process that does this. It uses the emotion to get back to the original memory. And it's called body memories. See, our mind can play all sorts of game with us and deceive us, but our body remembers. And so when somebody does something and I react, see, I have a body reaction, overreaction,
Right.
Especially with sexual abuse survivors and that sort of thing. Okay, that's because it's reacting to that original memory.
Wow.
So when the person, we have like 400 or 500 groups going with this, and I don't know, we've had thousands and thousands go through this. I'm a what works guy. And when people have an experience with God who reframes that memory, in other words, we take the belief system to God and say, God, what's the truth about this belief system? And when he speaks to the person individually, okay, that is experiential and it changes the belief system. And I've had people, I do one exercise with 200-300 people at a seminar at once, okay? And we'll go say find I don't trust anybody, or no matter how hard I try, it's never good enough. And we'll say, how strong is that emotion in their body? And they'll feel, it's a 10, right? We take them through this process, and in 10 minutes, I said, after they have this experience, see?
Yeah.
Then I'll go, okay, say it again. And they say, it's not there.
Oh my gosh.
The body, they don't believe it, so their body's not producing the emotion anymore.
So I got to make sure I'm clear on this. So you have a group of 200 to 300 people. You select someone from the audience to come up who is dealing with.
No, I take the whole group through it.
Oh, you take the whole group through it.
All through 300.
Oh my gosh.
We have several different ones.
Yeah.
But everything in Genesis is geared towards, using reactions and problems in life and to get to this belief system to heal the belief system.
Yeah.
So that's where recovery is.
Right.
Is returning to a former healthy state, to the person you were, and in changing the coping belief system that is there. So the bottom line of this, especially comes in, which is the bummer of all the research, and it's very good research, that most of this happens in the first year of life. I mean, our propensity to become addicted happens then.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Whatever we substitute for love and relationships, we can never get enough of.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's the core of addiction.
Yeah, that is.
Because we're living in a way that I'm not designed to live.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I cope with that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the brain starts to equate things with survival. So addiction, interestingly enough, is not about getting high.
Huh.
People get high, don't get addicted. Addiction is about being normal. I'm all anxious, I'm depressed, can't cope today, so I do this behavior, or I take a substance, and now I'm okay, I can cope. So the brain says, you need this to be normal to survive.
Right.
And so it creates a craving for it.
Mm.
So our basic cravings in the limbic system, there are only three, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Food, sex, and safety. We have natural cravings for food. Okay. We have natural cravings for sex and for safety, which means to feel normal. That's where drugs and alcohol and all that come into.
Uh-huh.
So that's why food and sex have the lowest recovery rates.
Huh.
Because they're natural cravings.
They're right. Yep. Exactly.
Where alcohol is not a natural craving.
Mm-hmm.
But food and sex are. And when they get perverted into coping with areas they weren't designed to cope with, then we can never get enough of it.
Wow. So I have to ask the question. I mean, if you're saying that the propensity towards addiction happens within the first year of life, is it possible to overcome this?
Oh, sure.
So you're saying, what's a percentage? Can you put a percentage on it of how many people go through your Genesis process that actually come through it and are healed on the other end, or recovery is a part of that?
Well, it's hard to say because we have groups and all that, but we get things all the time and say, I went through this process, I'm a different person.
Yeah.
And of course, there's all sorts of agencies who are using the one-on-one relapse prevention process. We have two processes, the group process, which we have DVDs with that so you can facilitate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And then we have a one-on-one process for more severe residential recovery. Okay. Relapse prevention, but that has to be done with a trained counselor.
Right. And that's an interesting question. And we're coming to the end of the show, but I need to ask, I mean, it seems like there are different levels of addiction in terms of severity. How do you classify that? I mean, if I'm, let's say I'm in a relationship and I think, well, I think they might have an addiction, but I'm not really sure. And yet if they were to come to your process, you'd say, no, this is a whole different situation.
Way of approaching things.
Yeah.
But, that's where, in order to get into recovery, you first have to have sobriety. So that's, the most successful program for sobriety in the world is the 12-step AA and NA type program.
Okay.
And it's interesting because we know this about our heart and limbic system. One of the reasons that 12-step groups work is a phenomenon called herding, like a herd of animals.
Uh-huh.
Okay? Is when you get into a herd of like animals, okay, or humans, okay, it raises serotonin in the brain. And serotonin decreases dopamine, which is where cravings are.
Wow.
So an addict will say, I got to get to a meeting today.
Yeah.
Because they're starting to have cravings.
Right.
And when they get into their own herd there, serotonin comes up and reduces the cravings. And that's why AA people don't go to an NA meeting. It's a different herd. They don't work.
Yeah.
See? Or a lot of Christian people, want to have a church group rather than an AA group.
Yeah.
But, the bottom line is all addictions are extremely isolating.
Yeah. Yep.
Because of that belief system, I can't trust anybody, it's nobody's business. And also the fear of they're going to make me give up this behavior, and then how am I going to cope?
How am I going to handle life? Right.
But see, the limbic system is programmed to help you avoid fear. And it's not safe to face those memories and thoughts, feelings, thoughts, and memories, alone.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But when you get into a crowd, then the limbic system senses a sense of safety and will begin to, allow you to feel some of these things, because you have to feel to heal.
Yeah. Yes.
Because the belief system's in the emotion.
Hmm.
So if you can't feel, you really can't heal. And so especially with PTSD, they're so overwhelmed, and I've been through things like that, and where you have to just shut down, and India and Egypt are just the poverty and death and all around. You have to shut it down,
mm-hmm.
And if you do that very often, it doesn't just come back.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of us, especially as men, we were taught that our emotions are something, you don't feel. You can't handle your own problems, and, don't ask for help, and, all those kinds of things. And so it's very difficult for us sometimes, to heal.
Yeah.
Because we were taught at a very early age not to feel.
Right. My last question. This has been so good. You are on the front lines of some of the biggest cultural issues in our society and really having a massive impact on it. So I thank you again for taking this interview. 35 years you've been in this, and you've seen a lot.
Yeah.
What would you say is the one thing, if there's one thing you could communicate to that addict today, that person who's just at the breaking point in so much pain, isolated, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd say one thing we have in Genesis, it says the right thing to do is the hard thing to do. Mm. And what's the hardest thing, especially for men? Ask for help. Mm. And that's where all recovery really begins, with humility. Mm. And humility's ask for help, whereas pride says I can do it myself.
Wow.
Okay? And so it opens up the heart, this humility. Okay? And of course, that's what hitting a bottom is. And some people, I've worked with people who don't have a bottom. Hmm. They go into the ER and get jump started and walk right back out and use. They don't seem to have, a bottom. But a bottom is when the pain of the behavior gets to be greater than the pain of giving up the behavior. Hmm. Then and only then will people begin to start getting into recovery. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that's why we want to take away all their enablers, and which are usually family members, or sometimes it's even the government giving them welfare and all, and mm-hmm. so they mm-hmm. don't have to get together, and they're using their welfare for drugs and all that. Or even with some of the PTSD work I've seen done, it kind of just validates how bad they feel and how messed up they are, without giving them the most powerful part of recovery, which is something called hope. Mm. Hope is a very powerful noun. It's something you have or you don't have. Mm-hmm. If people have it, are affected much differently than people who don't have it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And hope actually comes from change. See? Yes. And change comes from taking a risk. You see?
Right.
And so, like you were saying, addicts, they take the risk to go to a meeting and ask for help. Mm-hmm. And then they see other people there that are changing. Mm-hmm. So that gives them hope.
Wow.
And hope is what gets you through a bad day. Whereas hopelessness, you won't be able to think of one reason not to use when you have a bad day.
Yeah. Wow.
So these are all key to the brain and the things we've known for years, but now we understand that the neurobiology of it, right, and the spiritual component of
right,
it, and how the two together actually change our heart.
Wow. What we've been talking about is called the Genesis process, and this is Michael Dye, and I just want to say, Michael, thank you again. This has been a wealth of information, and not just information, actual information that can change lives. And so to that end, thank you for what you're doing. And for you that are listening, all this information about how to get a hold of the Genesis process, tell our audience a little bit about what, if they need to take that next step What can they do? I know that you have several different things that they could begin
Well,
to do right now.
we have a website, and it's genesisprocess.org, and that has information about the different materials we have and how to start groups. And there's also a map on there of groups and programs for people who are looking for help. Or now with the groups, if we have the DVDs, people can start their own group. It's pretty easy as long as you follow the rules, because you got to have this safe atmosphere for the secrets of the limbic system to begin to manifest.
Now, is that a training?
It's amazing how people have experience of, I'll just put it this way, of God moving through people to change their lives without professionals. And moving through them to change other people's lives in these groups. Okay? And then there's some YouTube videos that explain some of this stuff also. Yeah. But we try to keep it pretty simple.
Yeah. So is the training to be a facilitator of your program, is that like an online, or do I come to an actual event?
Well, the group training, we have DVDs.
Okay.
And I take everybody through each process and introduction, but there's also a whole DVD on there on how to train the facilitators to run the group, which really isn't difficult now that we have the DVDs to follow along.
Right.
Now, the one-on-one, more intensive and inner healing kinds of process that we have for relapse prevention, I do those live trainings. Okay. I may have one coming up in Coeur d'Alene in the fall. I'm not sure. I don't do too many of them anymore. I'm getting older. I don't travel very well. But now we have an online training.
Okay.
Where people can go through the one-on-one counselor training online. And it's actually better in some ways because they can go through it kind of slowly.
Yeah.
Rather than being overwhelmed in 4.5 days with all this information.
Yeah, because, I mean, just what you've shared in the last 40 minutes, I'm going to have to take some time to process through. It was a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. But the main thing is that there's hope.
Yes.
Because we actually know what's broken. And we know that, whether it's heroin addiction, alcohol, or rageaholic, or even an anxiety addiction. Anxiety addiction is probably the most destructive addiction in our country today, and people don't even know it's an addiction.
Yeah, right. I've never even heard that. So,
but anything that speeds up the body dulls the awareness of physical and emotional pain. So anxiety and anger, neurochemically, when you look at the brain scans, is almost identical to cocaine.
Wow.
So, how do people get anxiety? They worry. They worry because why? Because it creates anxiety.
Right.
And anxiety speeds you up and basically outruns depression and become addicted to it. Wow. So people are wound up, stressed all day. They say they don't like it. But, in Genesis we say, well, what would happen if you gave up anxiety? Well, I'd be depressed. So would you rather be anxious or depressed? Well, I'd rather be anxious.
You're just trading one for the other.
Yeah, but it's unconscious.
Right.
But when you get to the belief system that creates anxiety and you get some healing in that belief system, then there's some freedom. And seeing, especially with food, like a food, you would say, why do you eat when you're not hungry? We ignore the dieting. See?
Yeah.
When you answer that question, then we can begin to heal, why you have this craving for food when you're not hungry.
Right.
It's the limbic system.
Yeah.
So see, so this is kind of how it works. And that's why I'm so excited about it, because we're seeing people really get free rather than just find systems to cope with their behavior for the rest of their lives and relapse back and forth.
Well, I'm already seeing episode number 2 coming here shortly, and then no, I'm just kidding. But I mean, it's so true, because we spend so much time working with couples, and yet all of this is so connected, right? I mean, you can teach behavioral modification, communication skills, resolve conflict, but if you're not getting to the heart of the matter, which is oftentimes the belief system, the emotion,
to the limbic system of the matter,
right?
Yeah,
all that stuff is. It can be an attempt to help, but I don't think it really hits where it needs to. So,
well, a lot of times what happens with couples, Noel, is that we find that people are okay until they get married,
right?
And then when they get married, it's the first time they let somebody get close enough to them to push their buttons, and so they react to the person who's pushing the button,
right?
Okay? But they're not the person who put the button there. You see, so you get these reactions with each other for their childhood stuff and pushing these limbic wounds. And, it's like when you have a sore in your arm, somebody comes up and grabs it.
Yeah.
They didn't put the sore there, but what's your reaction to them?
Right.
You get angry, you know. You see, and it's just, that's a limbic kind of reaction to pain. So that's one thing for couples is, communication skills and all that happening. But we call it a road to the wound, that when you get your button push or an overreaction, it's an opportunity through that incident, through the body memory, to get to the original wound and heal the memory. And that's what changes the behavior.
Yeah, I think episode number 2 is definitely coming this way. Michael, I want to say
it's fun. Thank you for allowing me to be on your show and to, maybe give some people some hope.
Absolutely.
That there can be freedom, but it's a lot of work. See?
It is.
Because you're moving towards the very fears that cause you to be so destructive in the first place. And that takes a tremendous amount of courage, and it takes the support of others.
Right.
So that's why, Genesis is built the way it does, because we wanted to, once we found out what was broken, we had to say, okay, so what's it going to take, so what works?
Right, right. Well, everything that we've been referencing is right below this video, and I do want to let you know that there's some immediate steps that you can take just by going out to genesisprocess.org, picking up the workbook, getting into a group. You have 500 groups all over the country. They can find those groups there.
Yeah, most of them are at churches. But Genesis is made to be spiritual but not religious. So people that are not Christian or are having struggling with their whole concept of God can do Genesis, but of course, you can't really change the heart very well without God. And the problem with that is he usually works through people, and that's where it gets messy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you. And we appreciate you being on the show, and thank you for all the work that you're doing with so many lives out there.
All right. Thanks, Noel.
Take care.
Thanks for having me.